More than 150 years after the Civil War, monuments, schools, and roads across the country still honor Confederate generals and leaders. But in the midst of the recent protests demanding racial equality, there's a renewed push to take down the monuments. In a moment, Amna Nawaz will talk with the man who led the drive to have NASCAR ban Confederate flags. But first, Lisa Desjardins looks at how the death of George Floyd has prompted louder calls to remove public symbols of the Confederacy.
It is perhaps the greatest dismantling of the Confederacy since the Civil War. In Richmond, Virginia, in Birmingham, Alabama, Confederate statues removed or protests demanding their removal. New Orleans.
We're all going to bring the movement forward.
Jacksonville, Florida. Across the country, it is a direct extension of the protests against racism after George Floyd's death.
I think what's happening right now in the present moment is that people are really beginning to understand what we mean by the structures of white supremacy.
While some argue the monuments honor Southern ancestors, Leisha Brooks of the Southern Poverty Law Center says most went up either early in the 20th century or during the Civil Rights era, as racist groups like the Ku Klux Klan flexed their muscle. Some have come down before, like the Confederate flag off South Carolina State House grounds following the murder of 9 African Americans in a Charleston church in 2015, and statues removed after a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. But Brooks senses something different now.
I think we're in the midst of a real inflection point. I have never seen such a multi-racial, multi-ethnic coalition of protesters demanding an end to anti-Black racism.
For some, the monuments are an important start.
You were traitors, you attempted to secede from the Union, then had the audacity to lose, and then put up monuments of your loss? That feels like a great lie. And racism is what has allowed it to be a lie.
For me, a lot of these monuments represent times that members of my family and my culture and my race have suffered.
By removing these statues, it's going to give people an opportunity to really re-examine the history of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and Jim Crow and all that went with it.
According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, at least 1,800 sites across the country commemorate the Confederacy, either with a monument or place name. Among them, 10 military bases named for Confederate officers, including Fort Bragg in North Carolina and Fort Hood in Texas. Defense Secretary Esper has signaled he's open to changing those names. Retired Army Colonel Mike Jason wrote an op-ed to Pentagon leaders this week.
I've seen the emails and the paperwork. I've spoken to commanders and peers and colleagues, and they're ready to make this happen. They're talking to soldiers, they're generating options and alternatives. Great men and women have served this country, and they're excited to do this.
But President Trump himself has vehemently pushed back, tweeting these bases are part of great American heritage, and his administration would not even consider renaming them. But this week, the Senate Armed Services Committee, led by Republicans, voted behind closed doors to require renaming those bases within 3 years. Mike Rounds, Republican of South Dakota.
We don't want to forget what's happened in the past, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we should continue with those bases, with the names of individuals who fought against our country.
But Congress faces an issue under its own roof about the statues in the U.S. Capitol itself.
11 statues memorialize Confederate leaders, including Confederate President Jefferson Davis and Confederate General Joseph Wheeler, standing just a few feet away from a plaque marking the spot of Abraham Lincoln's desk in Congress. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this week asked for Congress to now take all the Confederate statues off display.
Can you imagine Jefferson Davis, Alexander Stephens, treason? They committed treason against the United States of America, and their statues are still here because their states put them here.
Republican Senator Roy Blunt, who oversees the committee responsible for the statues, says moving them is possible, but only the states can take them out of the Capitol. And some states are, like Arkansas, about to replace its controversial statues with musician Johnny Cash and civil rights activist and journalist Daisy Bates. It is a cultural turn. NASCAR this week banned the Confederate flag from its events. The Navy and Marine Corps have also just banned the flag. But some worry this is a slippery slope toward the removal of monuments to founding fathers, many of whom were slave owners. Others say the country needs to be more educated about its racist past.
I don't agree with the wholesale removal of everything that pertains to the Confederacy, because we need to understand what our history is. It's that we don't need things that glorify that history.
They need to be put in a historical context that they're not being put into. And there's so much work and healing to be done in this country. It's really not possible when you have people worshiping these symbols of oppression.
The Confederacy survived for only 4 years, but it has shaped discrimination and divide for generations since. Now, again, a test of how long its symbols will stand. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.